Hei og velkommen til webinar i KLP kapitalforvaltning. I dag skal vi snakke om geopolitikk, meget aktuelt tema. Og jeg har med meg Charles Myers fra Signum, og resten av samtalen skal være på engelsk. Welcome, Charles.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Thanks a lot for being here. You're an expert on geopolitics, and we're going to kick off with what's happening in Iran. Can you tell us what's actually happening and where do you see this is going?
Yeah, so thanks for having me. The good news is that we are in a temporary ceasefire.
Yep.
It looks like it's holding, and it will hold through the upcoming deadline of April 21st. It may get extended a bit further because the negotiations are about to be resumed again between the U.S. and Iran. The ultimate two red lines, though, and the reason we're concerned that we may see a re-escalation of hostilities looking out 2 or 3 weeks, is that for the United States, Iran has to agree to two things. First, no enrichment, no uranium enrichment for somewhere around 20 years. Now that 20 years there may be a little bit of room in there with President Trump, but Iran is going to have to agree to essentially give up their nuclear program. The second red line, and it's a much more immediate concern, is Iran has to agree to reopen the Strait of Hormuz and charge no toll. So what I've been saying to clients is if you believe that Iran is willing to agree to those two major issues, which would be concessions on their part, then the ceasefire will hold and the war is over. I think a more likely outcome, or certainly more likely than not, is that we cannot get to that agreement, an agreement on those two issues, and the United States may have to escalate militarily again, quite possibly trying to reopen the strait militarily. So we're in a temporary ceasefire for now.
But do you think that's acceptable for Iran, those two conditions, or is it?
No, I think Iran has emerged from the war more powerful than they probably even thought themselves. Before the war, they didn't control the Strait of Hormuz, and today they control it, and they have a chokehold on both the global oil markets as well as the global economy. And I don't think they're willing to just walk away in exchange for us I guess what we would do is lift sanctions and give some of their frozen assets back. But I think it's going to take more. I think Iran's going to ultimately want more to agree to those two conditions.
And what could that be?
I think it's going to be probably some reparations for the bombing and other. I think it's going to be that Israel withdraws from Lebanon and some other demands, all of which are doable. But I think in the end, the most important thing to watch over the next week or 2 weeks is will Iran reopen the Strait of Hormuz?
Yeah.
And if they are, then the good news is the war is over.
Right.
We can figure the rest out. It's those two. That is the biggest issue.
And what will the U.S. do then? Or what will Donald Trump do then if they have to escalate? And
so if we have to re-escalate militarily, what that will be is a major military offensive by the United States and Israel to take the Strait of Hormuz militarily, which will be air, naval, and boots on the ground, meaning U.S. soldiers possibly taking Karg Island or one of the other set of islands. It will not be an invasion of Iran. But one of the reasons that we're worried that President Trump is just buying some time with the ceasefire is the United States continues to move significant military hardware and even more troops into the Gulf. So again, the ceasefire is holding, but if we have to, I think we're looking at a major military campaign by the United States and Israel to take the Strait of Hormuz militarily.
Right. And those resources, they're not there yet, right?
No, they will be in place by the end of April.
Right.
Yeah.
So why did he do this in the first place, would you say? Was it a good idea, or was it a really bad idea, or was it...
So I think, first, if I can address one of the narratives that I don't think is true, which is that Israel dragged the United States into this war. That is not true.
No.
It sounds good, but it's just not true. I think that what happened from the Washington or the White House perspective is, given how surgical and successful the operation in Venezuela was, I think that the White House got or felt a bit emboldened and somehow thought that if we were to bomb Iran or go to war with Iran, that they would capitulate very quickly and easily. In fact, President Trump has said this. He thought that the Iranian government would capitulate in the first week after that initial round of bombing when we killed the Ayatollah. Trump really expected Iran to completely capitulate in 1 week. That did not happen. So to answer your question, I think the United States miscalculated, clearly, and once again underestimated Iran in terms of how resilient they are militarily, how offensively they have been militarily, including hitting their neighbors and destroying oil infrastructure in the Gulf. And third, really underestimated the fact that Iran would close the Strait of Hormuz. So I would argue this has been a major failure of U.S. foreign policy, and quite unusual because President Trump tends to be a little more risk adverse when it comes to foreign policy. And I would say this will go down in history as one of his bigger mistakes, at least for now.
Yeah. So is it that their means, their goals was very important, or did it become kind of personal for Trump?
Well, meaning where we are now, or
no, when they went to the attack, it kind of was it personal in the sense that they've been bothering him for a long time, so now it was time to.
I think
hit back.
Every U.S. president since 1979, when when the revolution in Iran happened, every U.S. president has tried to address Iran in some form, and I think what has happened over time is that Iran has just become more and more powerful, and their nuclear military capability has gotten more advanced. And so I think that really it was a combination under President Trump of Israel having been attacked, Israel using that opportunity to really weaken their biggest threats in the region, which are Iran and the proxies, and then the United States viewing this as an opportunity with Israel to possibly go in and do a decapitating blow and bring about leadership change. That obviously didn't work, but that was the thinking.
Let's say that the ceasefire doesn't hold and there will be an escalation. How do you think that the market will react, and how long will the kind of the strait be closed, or before you can get something out?
Yeah, so I'm actually a bit worried. I think the markets have come back, and now the U.S. equity market is higher than where it was before the war. So and hitting all-time highs, and the price of oil has sold off meaningfully. So the markets, and this is, I would say, the financial markets in general today are discounting the war is over, and we're going back to almost to where we were right before the war. Even in the best case scenario where the war is over, what is not priced in yet are the tail events, or the ongoing impact of the energy shock. I think that still needs to be worked through. We haven't really seen and had enough time, I think, to determine what the economic fallout will be for a number of countries around the world, given the oil shock. So there's that part of it. Now, if the markets, if the war is not over, then I would be very worried, because then we're in for a major correction. Just because, again, what is discounted today is the war is over and everything is fine. So I personally would be a little bit more cautious here. I think that any notion that President Trump is just going to walk away from the Gulf, walk away from the Strait of Hormuz, without getting it reopened with no toll, and Iran agreeing to no nuclear program, that is just wishful thinking. And I think the markets right now are perhaps a little too complacent on that.
We'll see, and we'll probably talk more about that. But moving on to another issue that is coming up, and is also something in the background here, and maybe influencing the decision, is the midterm that is coming up in November. Yeah.
Yes.
And it's not that far away. how does it play on the Iran? First of all, how does it play on the situation in Iran, and what do you in general think of the midterm?
Yeah, so I'd say a couple things. First, on Iran and the midterms. The midterms are 6.5 months away, which is a very long time still in politics.
Still a long time.
Yeah, it's still a long time in politics. That's a very long time. So President Trump is not as worried about the midterms or the impact of the war on the midterms yet. And I think that's, if anything, another reason that in case the United States has to re-escalate militarily in Iran, it will still be a relatively short campaign. You can't have this war going on 2 or 3 months from now. So, of all of the drivers to force President Trump to course correct in the war or on Iran, the price of oil at 120 or higher is the number one issue. So if the price of oil goes back up to 120 and stays there, then I would expect Trump to literally capitulate or course correct. The second thing to watch closely is the 10-year yield. Whenever the 10-year yield gets to 4.5, the Trump administration gets nervous. At 5, they'll capitulate or course correct on anything. So there are some market forces that are serving as guardrails or will in case the war resumes. The third issue is the midterms, which you've mentioned. And I think what's interesting is the polling today in the United States is very clear. A majority of Americans are against the war. They really don't think this is a valid or a good use of U.S. resources, both military or economic. Where it will really play in the midterms is the price of gasoline, which today is at above $4 a gallon. That's a very big deal. That affects every American household. So there's still time to turn that around for the price to come down of gasoline. But again, looking out over the next month to 2 months, if the war is not resolved, then it becomes a midterm issue.
Right.
So just to say, as of today, I don't think the war is going to be a huge impact. The bigger issues in the midterm really are that President Trump has a record low approval rating for any sitting president, or near record low at this point in his presidency. It's actually at a 70-year low, not an all-time record, but 70-year low of any sitting president at this point in his term. That's a big issue. The second major issue is affordability. And it's not just the price of gasoline. Every product in the affordability basket in the United States is higher. The price is higher than before Trump came back into office, and now gasoline as well. Very big issue. Number 2 in our midterms is immigration. Again, the tactics have backfired. 3 is access to health care. And 4th is some of the ethics around Epstein and the conflicts of interest of the first family. So going into this midterm, President Trump has a very weak hand. And it's very hard to turn those issues around in time. And I think, our House view is that the Democrats will take the House, but not the Senate. I actually personally think the Senate is more in play than the data today shows.
Okay.
And we'll see. But we're seeing, I believe, the beginning of a Democratic wave in the United States. And I would not be surprised if the Democrats win both chambers in November.
Right. But the Democrats are not very popular either, are they? Or is that just that they're not that?
Yeah, I think the approval rating of first of all, a majority of Americans are really quite negative on all of our politics, and so the approval rating of the Democratic Party is also very low. But a midterm election is always a referendum on the sitting president, and that's the bigger issue. So I think even with where the Democrats are today, if you look at every special election that's happened in the last 4 months, and then we had off-cycle elections in Virginia and New Jersey just last November, the Democrats won everything and by a much bigger margin than expected. And lastly, for President Trump, he's lost significant ground with some of the demographic groups where he made a lot of progress in 24. So young white American men, black men, Hispanic voters, there's a 30-point swing away from Trump in 14 months because of immigration, and then suburban women who are the biggest swing bloc. So I think the midterms will be a referendum, and I would say that the Democrats are looking pretty good as a result of that, more because of that than the fact that whether they've gotten their act together.
But to explain how you think that the Senate is also in play, because most people say that the Senate is won't change, or is that
Yeah,
that
no, absolutely. Consensus is a Democratic House and a Republican Senate. That's also our call today, and the reason is we're a data-dependent firm, and the data today, that is what the data shows. The reason I personally think the Senate is in play, and I think that the polling will shift over the next 2 months to show this, is the Democrats need to hold all the seats they have today in the Senate, and they need to win 4 more. I think they're going to win North Carolina and Alaska, which means they only need to win 2 of Ohio, Maine, Iowa, or Texas. I think they're going to very likely win Ohio and Maine. So I would say the Senate is absolutely in play. It just doesn't look that way right now.
That's going to be very exciting. And
Yes.
and if we see a split, how will kind of how will that turn out, after the election, and how will it turn out if the Democrats take both houses?
Yeah, and one other thing just to say, if you look at the election in Hungary last weekend, voters unanimous, I mean, by such a pretty big margin, rejected Orban. I think you're going to see something similar this November in the United States. The truth is, with the exception of Virginia and New Jersey, the vast majority of Americans haven't had a chance to vote yet since Trump has come back. This November will be the first time that all Americans can vote. And I think you're going to see an even bigger rejection of some of his policies than the polling today shows. In terms of what it means, first, if it's a split Congress, a Democratic House, Republican Senate, there's not that much that changes. There's 3 things to think about. One, a Democratic House will be able to subpoena and investigate. And it's a powerful tool. The president has immunity, but they'll go after his family. They'll go after some members of the cabinet, maybe some people around them. And they don't have any enforcement capability, but still it'll be quite public. Second, a Democratic House, the president and the White House have to negotiate with to get the budget done, to get the National Defense Authorization. It must pass legislation. They have to give in to some of the Democratic priorities around immigration and healthcare. The third issue in a split Congress this is what worries me, is we have to raise the debt ceiling next year. We punted the debt ceiling in the One Big Beautiful Bill until next year. And if it's divided Congress, I think the Democrats may try to obstruct and hold the country hostage on the debt ceiling. So the markets may not like that, depending on how close we get to technical default. But I think in a divided Congress, we're likely to get relatively close.
For us in Norway, it kind of sounds like a bit unfair politics to, investigate family and, That's a bit unfamiliar for us.
Well, it's unfamiliar,
Can you
but
explain why that's a big issue?
But I think the reason is that you don't have elected officials that are openly engaged in conflicts of interest, making billions of dollars. And you don't have a head of state that was gifted a $400 million airplane from a foreign government while he's a sitting president.
That's a big difference.
These are really big differences. So I would say that as a country of laws, we do need to investigate, and we need to, where anyone has broken the law, we need them to be held accountable.
What about then if the Democrats take the Senate also?
So if they take both, the House and the Senate, then at least on this debt ceiling, we won't have a standoff because they'll raise the debt ceiling. So that's one issue that'll be off the radar. The challenge, though, for the country and I think maybe for the markets is in a democratically controlled Congress, they are very likely to impeach Donald Trump. And the Democrats know they won't have the votes to convict him in the Senate, but it is a public trial. And that would be the whole point, is to try to really embarrass him and weaken him. But other than that, a Democratic Congress, there's not much else they can do. So I'm not expecting major changes. The biggest changes are politics become more polarized, I think.
Right. For that could backfire, the
Absolutely.
impeachment.
Look, impeachment's been weaponized. The Democrats should not impeach Trump, but I don't think they'll be able to help themselves if they win both chambers.
If we look further ahead then, and for 2028 and the election then.
Yeah.
So who's gonna be the favorite? And is it J.D. Vance and Donald Trump son?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, well, on the Republican side, J.D. Vance will be the front runner. Of course, he is the vice president, and he will be the front runner. But he has a very tough road ahead because President Trump has twice publicly said he may not endorse J.D. Vance, which is very unusual, and so it means that J.D. will have a primary, and I think Marco Rubio runs, Nikki Haley runs, DeSantis runs, Ted Cruz. And what we hear from pretty good sources around the Trump family is they're keeping a lane open for Don Jr.
Right.
Because President Trump, as you know, wants a third term more than anything.
Yep.
And he's not going to get a third term. So the second best is one of the sons, and Don Jr. is the third term. So I would keep a very close eye on Don Jr. On the Republican side. On the Democratic side, the Democrats are going to have a very crowded primary. Everybody's running except for Joe Biden, as I like to say. And in the end, the Democrats will nominate a centrist ticket that is probably Governor Beshear of Kentucky with either Shapiro, Whitmer. It'll be a very centrist ticket, and they will run on the economy. So I feel good about that piece of it, but I can't tell you who's going to be the nominee yet. The one I'm watching is Governor Beshear of Kentucky.
Right. And is Donald Trump, preparing for this now when he kind of dumps Iran on J.D. Vance on something which he was probably negative?
Yeah, I think
he
so.
wasn't thrilled about Iran.
Yeah, no. Well, JD was very against the war, but now the issue though is when you're vice president or you're in the cabinet, your positions are the president's positions. So JD is now for the war, but. No, I know there are a lot of people in the U.S. and in the media that are saying that President Trump has, sent JD to Pakistan to do the negotiation to set him up to fail. I don't really agree with that. He sent JD because JD is the second most powerful elected official in America. So I think it was actually a good faith gesture by the United States to say that we're taking these negotiations very seriously. No, the issue for JD is very different. Which is JD has an even lower approval rating than the president, and that is remarkable because JD hasn't done anything, like good or bad. So it's quite unusual. He's just he has a very tough hill to climb, and I think that. Ultimately, for President Trump, he would prefer to have his family, stay in power. And I think, ultimately, President Trump will endorse and go with the winner. So if JD is the one that in the primary it looks like he's going to, be ahead, of course, Trump will support him. But JD has a very tough road to climb.
So how will America look like with JD as president? So
I think, one of the things that I always say about President Trump is he's genuine, and I feel strongly about this, is that he's a moderate. President Trump has no fixed ideology and is totally transactional and will course correct on anything. I think JD, so therefore I think he's a moderate. I think JD will be more ideological and more rigid. He's certainly more isolationist than President Trump. So we need to think about that. He's also much more anti-Europe than President Trump. I think he's also more populist and more protectionist. So I think a J.D. Vance presidency would be a little bit more of a traditional Republican, quite conservative administration, but one that's even more insular and inward-looking. And I think really would be very damaging and quite skeptical and damaging around some of our most important alliances, like with the EU, with NATO. So I think those are some of the things that I would be thinking about if JD wins.
Okay, let's say we finished with the midterm and we either get the split house or the Democrat takes both houses. What issues will we be talking about then? Is it Cuba, Greenland, the Pope?
Yeah.
What's going to be the important things, and what's going to be important for the economy? For the markets to look for.
Yes.
What about trade?
Yeah. So I think that once we get through the midterms, and even possibly one or two of these things before the midterms, because it's still 6.5 months away, is that in foreign policy, President Trump has surprised everybody in that he's been much more expansionist and much more aggressive. I think most people assumed that President Trump, because he's an isolationist, was going to, under the guise of America First, focus on domestic issues. And instead, what we have found is a president that is using America First to really do two things in foreign policy that are, again, very aggressive. First is economic nationalism, so protectionism and tariffs. I think that just continues. The tariffs are absolutely going to be snapped back and are here to stay. The second part, though, is, again, a more expansionist and more, I would argue, imperialist foreign policy, and that we've seen in Venezuela already, which, again, the United States now essentially controls Venezuela, and we have unfettered access to the biggest oil reserves in the world, which was one of the reasons we did it. The other thing, though, that is on the horizon are both Cuba and Greenland. And on Cuba, I'll just say kind of quickly, at some point in the next 12 months, there will be either leadership change or regime change in Cuba. The United States is absolutely committed to bringing that about and opening the Cuban economy to foreign, mainly U.S. companies. The risk on Cuba, I think, is that Russia's not going to leave quietly. It's their last stronghold in our hemisphere, and people, I think, including in the White House, are underestimating that. So we could have a bit of a standoff with Russia over Cuba. And then Greenland is a totally different set of issues, but President Trump is very serious about the U.S. increasing our military presence on the island, having Greenland restrict Chinese and Russian ships from their territorial waters, and preferential, which is really a euphemism for exclusive access to Greenland's critical minerals. The first two issues are relatively straightforward. The third, on critical minerals, is a major issue for Denmark. And I think, for Denmark, this is a national sovereignty issue. It's a national pride issue. I think the way the United States has gone about it is problematic. But the United States will absolutely get to a three-party agreement with Greenland and Denmark over this. Unfortunately, I think the only way to do it, which I'm not advocating for, but is to run Denmark over. So we're setting up for a pretty big issue with Denmark as well. But if I can, to bring it all together, and partly to answer your question on what to think about over the next 2.5 years, or the remainder of Trump's term, and this is with or without Congress, is that under the guise of America First, one of the things that the Trump administration is doing that they don't get enough credit for is, and it's very strategic, is trying to weaken Russia and China and kick Russia and, by extension, China out of our hemisphere, out of Venezuela, out of Cuba. And then also with Greenland, because of global warming, what President Trump has very rightly identified as a major national security threat is that the Arctic is a vulnerability for the United States and NATO. And that's why Greenland is so important. So, I always say with President Trump, he's much more strategic than he gets credit for, partly because of the rhetoric and the tactics and the way he does things. But on this broader issue, these big issues of national security for the United States and NATO, I would argue he's being very strategic.
So you say that he's got a point on Greenland?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Look, I think, again, I'm not advocating for the way he's going about it. Sure. In fact, I've been saying that if President Trump had just, sent a delegation of 4 or 5 very senior people from the State Department that were maybe former ambassadors to Denmark, and with Marco Rubio to Copenhagen, and said very nicely, this is what we want and this is how much we're going to pay for it, right? Yeah. With you, Denmark, let's work on this. I think we would have gotten there, by the way. Yeah. It's that's not his tactic, that's not his style. But I'm here to tell you that in the next 12 months, there will be a 3-party agreement between the United States, Denmark, and Greenland, where we will get those 3 things that I mentioned. This is a massive home run for Greenland, by the way, just to say those the 57,000 Greenlanders are about to win the lottery. Yep. And it's, I understand the sensitivities with Denmark, but the truth is they haven't invested that much in Greenland. But Greenland is now, and in the future, going to be absolutely vital from a national security point of view.
So you say that they're going to run over Denmark, and they just have to
unfortunately.
Get used to it.
Yeah, and I think that on Denmark, again, I'm not advocating for this at all, but just articulating where the White House is. Here in Europe, what the EU and other NATO members are going to have to decide is, will they stand with Denmark, aside from in rhetoric? Meaning, will the EU trigger the anti-coercion instrument, for example, to stand with Denmark? I doubt that.
Yeah.
So I think that aside from rhetoric, I think that Denmark's going to be out there on its own on this one.
Greenland is not that important of 60%.
I don't think it's important enough for Europe to risk getting into a major trade war or other punitive back and forth with the United States. And I think deep down, this is probably not a very popular thing to say in Europe, but I think deep down, most Europeans probably understand that Denmark hasn't invested as much in Greenland as the United States will.
We are sitting kind of far from the U.S. and we see that the market is reacting. The stock market, for instance, and now, as we speak, has been pretty solid, and we are close to all-time high. At the same time, we see all these statements, which is strange, unfamiliar for us. It gives volatility, but at the same time, it's more to the U.S. It's more to the U.S. company than a president that have a quarrel with the Pope, for instance. Can you explain a little bit more?
Yeah.
What's actually happening and why?
Yeah. So here's what I would say. So I have been very positive on the outlook for the U.S. economy and, by extension, the U.S. equity market, going all the way back to November of 2024 when President Trump won the election.
Yeah.
Because literally from that moment, what I've been saying, and it's played out, is that we were going to get the biggest tax cuts for a second time, because we got the Trump tax cuts and Trump won. We were going to get even more tax cuts and a much bigger deregulation push under Trump too. And so I remain very optimistic on the outlook for the economy, U.S. economy this year. I think the equity market is absolutely right to be hitting all-time highs. And the reason I say that is, when I'm in Europe and in Asia, and I was in Latin America recently, I say this a lot. The media coverage of President Trump or the Trump administration around the world is so universally negative.
Yep.
It's almost cartoonishly negative. And I think the foreign media also tends to exaggerate the degree of political polarization in the United States, the rise of political violence. There's an element of truth in all of it, but the coverage is vastly exaggerated. The truth is the United States is one of the highest functioning countries in the world. The United States has, as you know, the largest, most dynamic, innovative economy in the world. And I always say to friends of mine or people that are outside of the U.S. that have a particularly negative view of the U.S. is just come visit the country and you'll see. The country is not only functioning very well, the economy is booming, corporate earnings are very strong, and we have relatively low unemployment. So I think there's always this disconnect between what's happening on the ground versus some of the perception and the coverage. And again, the Trump administration is to blame for some of this negative perception. One last quick thing, though, and the reason I remain very optimistic on the country, even looking out, into the future, is that in the United States, our private sector, the reason the country's been so successful is the private sector, and in the private sector, so. I, for example, am a very active and very visible Democrat, and I agree, however, with even the most conservative Republican or MAGA voter on two issues that are absolutely central to the American dream and have been central to the success of the country, which is private property and the accumulation of wealth. Right. We agree fundamentally on that, 99.9% of Americans. Our private sector, therefore, has done well over cycles, regardless of who's in the White House. Sometimes they get in the way a little bit, sometimes they help. This White House is doing a little bit of both. But the truth is, it's very important, I think, when trying to assess country risk in the U.S. and assess investing in the U.S., is to look a little bit beyond our politics and just look at our private sector and understand that over cycles, the United States does very well, no matter what's happening politically. And therefore, I'm very optimistic.
Because there's a discussion in Norway when we see this volatility. People, and at the same time, they see that the U.S. companies do very well. So the market cap of the U.S. companies are large. Magnificent Seven is a big portion of the world index.
Yeah.
So some people in Norway say that this is dangerous. 70% invested in the U.S. But at the same time, this is the most successful companies in the world that have a lot of their income outside the U.S.
Right.
You're not worried that the volatility that we see on the political side will destroy for these very, very successful companies?
No, I'm not concerned about our politics getting in the way or leading to value destruction. And I say that again because in the private sector, we all tend to look a bit beyond politics. So what worries me more about the U.S. In terms of big structural threats is the deficit. I think the single biggest structural threat to the United States is the deficit, and that's actually going to go up even faster now because of the war. We have to deficit finance some of the war and some of the backfilling of the military hardware. Of all of the threats on the horizon or risks on the horizon, everyone's focused on politics. They're focused on, are we going to have an independent Fed? Will we have free and fair elections? Is Trump going to try to stay in office illegally? Just quickly, we will have an independent Fed. I think Kevin Warsh is an excellent choice. We will have free and fair elections. Trump is not going to stay in office illegally. I feel very good about the transition of power in 2028. The real threat to the United States is the deficit. And there's really no easy way out of that. So I think we've got some time on that. But ultimately, in the next 2 to 3 years, I think the markets may force some kind of resolution there. So I worry more about that.
Is it a spending problem or is it
It's both.
Income problem?
No, it's both. If you listen to the current administration and Scott, he'll say, we don't have a revenue problem, we have a spending problem. It's both.
Yep.
We have a revenue problem and a spending problem. And so in Washington, if you talk to any elected official on either side, they will say the deficit is they agree it's a big problem. What happens, though, is after acknowledging the problem, the two sides cannot agree on the remedy. The Democrats want to raise tax or raise revenue. Republicans want to cut spending. We need to do both, and we're not going to do enough of either until the markets force us. But at some point, we're going to have to raise tax in the United States. It's just a reality, and we need to also cut more spending. But until the markets force us to do that, we will continue. I always say in the United States, given we have the world's reserve currency, we will continue to be as fiscally irresponsible as possible, our government. No matter who's in the White House, no matter who's in control of Congress, we will push the envelope or the boundaries of fiscal irresponsibility until the markets force a solution. And I don't think we're in that territory yet. I think it's in the next 2 to 3 years.
So what's going to give you? Will it be spending or will it be taxes or will it be kind of inflation that is?
It'll be tax increases.
Will it be tax increases?
It'll have to be, and so, probably in 2 or 3 years, but not massive. I think, we will probably see in the next 2 to 3 years, or certainly in the next Congress, 2 Congresses from now, taxes on companies and the richest Americans probably go up a little bit. So, but it'll be hopefully that with some spending cuts and then also above average growth. We can grow our way out of it. So we'll see. Now, if we have gridlock and we can't cut spending and or raise taxes, then I would worry.
Right. Yeah. So increase taxes, but on a controlled basis, without pushing growth down. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Let's say we move beyond 2028, which is a really long time.
Yes.
How does the kind of the geopolitics looks like now? How's the different? I think after the period that we've been through now,
Yeah, I'd say a couple of things. I'm very optimistic. First, looking even beyond 2028 on the outlook for the United States, because no matter who wins, I think that the American people, starting this November in the midterms, and then again in 2028, a majority of Americans are going to reject 2 things: this extreme policy volatility that we have today, meaning unpredictable policy making from the White House, and also really want the country to come a bit back to the center. The vast majority of Americans are centrists.
Yep.
We're a center-right country, actually. So I feel very good about that, no matter who wins in 2028, and I think the country will be on track. On the global stage, and if a Democrat wins in 2028, by the way, just to say that he or she will spend the first 2 years going around the world trying to repair some of this damage to with our allies in the relationships. Now, I think it's going to take more than one president. It may take 2 or 3 U.S. presidents to repair the damage, but we will. The future of the United States is absolutely with NATO. The future of the United States, and NATO has been the most successful military alliance in human history, and it will absolutely remain in place. And then we have some work to do with Canada, Mexico, and but so I feel very confident and very good about those things. The bigger risks are that we're already and it's been ongoing, but hurtling towards ultimately some kind of major standoff with China.
Yep.
And that standoff is either going to be, it will most likely be around Taiwan. And so I think in terms of geopolitical or other risks on the horizon, Taiwan is probably still the biggest by far. I think North Korea is something we just need to watch because they now are a nuclear military power. I think that Iran, if there isn't regime change in the next 2 to 3 months, which does not look likely, they will rebuild. They will probably rebuild their military, their nuclear program clandestinely, and will be a problem again down the road. And so, and then the real question is, what does Russia do after the war in Ukraine?
Yep.
I think I keep hearing from the White House that Trump wants to get to a ceasefire in Ukraine in the next 3 months. If that, we'll see if that happens. But after a ceasefire in Ukraine, to your question on what are some of the bigger risks down the road, Russia is going to get a much better deal in Ukraine than they probably realize. So they're going to be powerful. I don't think they're going to be a huge threat to Europe, but I think they become a bigger state sponsor of terrorism. And I think you'll see a lot more sabotage in Europe like they're doing today, which is undersea cables, rail, and other sabotage, interfering in elections, threats to civil and commercial aviation. So I worry a lot about Russia post-war because they are going to bounce back and continue to be a threat, but in a slightly different way.
So you don't think that's a broken country, that not that big economy that Europe is going to outgrow them, both on the military and on the economic side?
The problem with military dictatorships is even when they are weaker, or often because they are weaker, they tend to act out more.
Yeah.
And I think that's the threat. That's the risk with Russia. I think the real risk with Russia is after the war and Putin rebuilds, he will continue to try to destabilize Europe again through election interference, through cyber, and through other acts of sabotage and terrorism. But I think what he's really going to do is go the other way and try to take over Georgia, finish the takeover of Georgia, and then possibly move on Armenia. I think that's where he's headed. So Russia will have lost the war in Ukraine. They've lost Venezuela. They're about to lose Cuba.
Yeah.
But they are going to act out in other ways that will continue to be a geopolitical threat, unfortunately. And then Taiwan will be the biggest event. In the end, the United States will go to war over Taiwan because if China takes Taiwan, they control the Taiwan Strait, and they will control much more of the South China Sea militarily. The United States will never allow that to happen.
So you definitely think that they will go to war over Taiwan?
I'm here to tell you, at best, we will have a military standoff with China over Taiwan. At worst, we will have a war. It will not be a war of the U.S. alone. It'll be the United States with Japan, South Korea, Philippines, Australia, and the United Kingdom. And we will win that war, but it will be brutal.
Right.
And what I say on Taiwan is, I think because Trump won, China has probably pushed their ambition to take Taiwan out by 4 years. Because Trump is so unpredictable. By the way, I think Trump would defend Taiwan. So Taiwan is going to be the next U.S. president's problem.
Okay, so they won't make a deal with Trump on Taiwan?
There is no deal. There's no way you can make a deal on Taiwan.
Right.
President Trump doesn't have the authority over Taiwan to give it away to China. I'm sure he thinks he does, but he doesn't. So no, Taiwan will be the biggest event in all of our lives. And I think China is dead serious about taking it. But I think it's the window for China to move on Taiwan, which will be a maritime blockade first and then possibly a takeover, that window opens in 2029.
Right.
It'll be the next U.S. president's problem.
But won't that destroy the economy in Taiwan if they really do more than a friendly takeover?
It's debatable.
Right.
What I would say on Taiwan is, in China, they have a very different view of Taiwan than the United States does. They really view Taiwan as theirs. They have every right to take it, and I think they'd be willing to live with quite a bit of value destruction in Taiwan to be able to ultimately reclaim it. They've done. If you look at since the Chinese takeover of Hong Kong, there's been massive value destruction.
Yep.
So for China, these are bigger strategic issues. It's not only about their economy or the economic outlook for Taiwan. For them, it's about ultimately having a much bigger military presence in the South China Sea.
You said US will win that war.
Yes.
Why?
I think for a couple of reasons. One, the PLA, the Chinese military, is untested and probably a little bit like, but not quite as bad as the Russian army initially in Ukraine, and other countries that project military might that haven't really had their military tested. I think that China, again, is probably not quite as sophisticated militarily. More importantly, if it ever comes to a war, it will be, again, China against a really formidable military coalition of the United States, Japan, South Korea, Philippines, Australia, and the United Kingdom. That is a very powerful military coalition. I would put my money on that coalition winning again, beating China.
That would be very good for the markets, I guess.
Well, that would be a terrible event for the markets. And I think, we have time on this, and it will be a gradual buildup. We're not going to wake up tomorrow morning and find out China's invaded Taiwan. This will be a very gradual process. And at some point, starting probably in 2029, it will start with some kind of maritime blockade of Taiwan by China. So we have time.
Is there any other things that we haven't talked about today that we should either be worried about or very happy about when it comes to things that affect the markets?
Yeah, look, I think one of the other really big issues that I have yet to hear a really convincing argument either way is what ultimately will the impact of AI be? Both on job losses, on being incredibly transformational. How do we regulate it? And where will we all be because of AI 5 years from now? And everyone has these wild projections, but some are very positive, some are very negative, some are mixed. And I think that figuring out that and what the market impact of that is going to be absolutely critical for investors. But I have yet to hear anyone with really credible forecasts. A lot of it today seems like science fiction to me.
Seems like quite a lot of the development is happening in the US on the AI side.
Yes.
Yeah. Is that what you will expect for the
Absolutely.
future?
Look, as I said earlier, one of the reasons the United States has been such a successful country, given that we're only 250 years old, is because of our private sector. And in our private sector, innovation has always been literally the driving force. The United States will win the AI race. We're miles ahead.
Yep.
There's no other country in the world that has trillion-dollar market cap companies. That's not a coincidence. And I think that if you really look out in terms of future innovation, it's much bigger than AI. It's robotics. It's quantum computing. There's so many other parts. And I think that China is today and will be the world leader in electric vehicles. They are probably going to be one of the world leaders in robotics. But the United States will stay at the forefront of all of this. I feel very good about that. I'm very optimistic on that.
That's great. It's been very interesting. We covered a lot of really interesting issues that I hope that we can discuss more in the future.
Good, and you have me back. You can hold me accountable on some of these views.
Yeah, we will.
But no, I remain very optimistic on the outlook for the U.S. and the U.S. equity market.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks a lot, Charles. Appreciate that you took the time to come and talk to us about this.
Thank you. And it's very nice to be in Oslo, so thank you.
Thanks a lot. Det var meget interessant, og vi har vært gjennom mange interessante saker som vi helt sikkert kommer tilbake til. Og tusen takk til dere som har hørt på, og tusen takk til Charles. Takk for nå.
Denne videoen skal anses som markedsføringsmateriell og skal ikke forstås som et tilbud eller anbefaling om kjøp eller salg av finansielle instrumenter. KLP Kapitalforvaltning påtar seg ikke ansvar for direkte eller indirekte tap eller utgifter som skyldes forståelsen av og eller bruken av informasjon i videoen. Ytterligere nøkkelinformasjon og prospekt for alle våre fond er tilgjengelig på klp.no.